Helldivers has seen one hell of a last week and a half, with recent additions to the game already getting raised eyebrows from skeptics and comments from the game's CEO. Are we headed back down that path where realism, pick rates, and internal spreadsheets will decide the fate of this game? For some, they say it's inevitable. If you're new here, please consider hitting subscribe and ringing the notifications bell to receive my future upload alerts. And away we go into the latest news and discussions from Helldivers. 529 days ago on March 25th, 2024, Arrowhead dropped a bombshell on the Helldivers 2 community with this studio self-published blog titled Balancing the Firepower in Helldivers 2. Now, in this article, 𝗵𝗄𝗄𝗏, head of product testing at Arrowhead, went on to lay out the studio's holistic vision for weapon balancing. And for players, this was eye-opening because it was the first glimpse behind the curtain at Arrowhead to see what they were striving for, what their vision for Helldivers 2 truly was. Here's what was said. First, I'd like to speak to the general power of primary weapons. Many have commented that they aren't powerful enough and are unable to deal with all the enemies either by the amount of ammunition required or their raw DPS. This is very much intentional. Let me say that again, in case you missed it. This is very much intentional. You need to rely on your stratagems and the stratagems of your team to deal with all the enemies effectively. Either by Eagle airstrikes, orbitals, support weapons, or turrets, some of your loadout or team should be tailoring their loadout to killing the weaker stuff more efficiently. This doesn't mean that your primary weapon shouldn't feel good to use, but please understand that it is a primary only in the sense that it's something you always spawn with. You see, back at that time, we as Helldivers had been playing for just a few months, and we had progressed up through the difficulty tiers, encountering bigger and badder enemies, and we had started to rely on specific weapons to carry us through those times. And for context, the Helldivers you have now is not the game we had back then. So many of our primary and stratagem weapons were severely underpowered, leaving us with just a few selections, which at that time was the breaker, railgun, shield backpack meta. What brought about that post by 𝗲𝗏𝗏 and Arrowhead is that several weeks prior, they had gone in and effectively nerfed those preferred weapons and gear to balance the game to that early vision of Helldivers of relying on stratagems. To further complicate matters at that time, the planetary modifier system used to be designed around a philosophy of taking away from players the very thing that 𝗲𝗏𝗏 and Arrowhead wanted us to rely on, stratagems. Players would frequently see modifiers stacked, such as orbital fluctuations, which increased your stratagem cooldowns by 50%, complex stratagem plotting, which added 100% more call-in time, AA defenses that would reduce your stratagem slots from 4 down to 3, atmospheric interference that would further scatter your stratagems, causing them to be even more off-target than they normally are. But the worst and most nefarious of these modifiers was electronic countermeasures. Born from the hell pits of Mordor, this modifier would scramble your stratagem codes, resulting in players thinking that they were calling in a resupply or reinforcement, only to find out they were holding and had just cast a 500 kg within feet of their entire squad. We've seen nearly 1 million new Xbox recruits join our ranks in the past week, along with countless others on other platforms. And to say that the Helldivers you have in your hands now is vastly different than what we had way back when would be an understatement. Starting a couple of months after Helldivers launched, this realism versus power fantasy, studio's vision versus players' desires battle for the future of Helldivers started up, and it's been ongoing within the game ever since. We've seen the studio acknowledge that they track pick rates for weapons and gear, as shown from this post from almost a year ago when the incendiary breaker was about to receive one of its mini adjustments in order to bring it more in line with other weapons in the category. However, what tends to be lost in these balancing discussions is exactly why players are choosing one weapon over the other. Because in the case of Helldivers, it comes down to a weapon giving players a fighting chance of putting them on an even level with their enemies, versus using a weapon that is grossly underpowered and puts a Helldiver in a position of being severely outgunned. What tends to happen here, though, is that the outlier is brought back down instead of what the players want, to bring all the underperforming weapons and gear up to the par with that outlier, which gives players more options and build diversity. Meta is often a term that is thrown around with negative connotations to it, but the most effective tactics available is simply players finding specific gear or weapons and identifying those as being the most efficient and effective at doing something. However, in the case of Helldivers, and I'm speaking here as someone that is approaching 1,000 hours in the game, meta carries with it a somewhat different meaning. We're just looking for weapons that can do what they are designed to do, along with gear passives and boosters that can at least try to keep us in the fight. We've seen firsthand what happens when weapons are dropped into the game, and for whatever reason, they arrive imbued with the strength of a god. The Eruptor, the Ultimatum, and others have seen this fleeting moment of glory followed by a resounding thud when they are returned to mortal form. Now, in the case of the Eruptor, it launched using the same shrapnel as an orbital, only to see shrapnel completely removed from the game, effectively butchering the once godly weapon. It then went through several different versions with more base damage, more explosive damage, until finally, months later, shrapnel returned to the game along with better armor pen. For the Ultimatum, it was instantly found and loved for the fact that it had the necessary demo force to destroy heavy structures like automaton jammers. No longer did players have to snake their way into a fully protected bot compound when they could just run up close enough to delete the entire facility with an Ultimatum round. Of course, in short order, the explosion damage of the ult was buffed, while the projectile strength and demo force were both nerfed. As players, we've seen terms like pick rates, breakpoints, and realism thrown around when describing under or overperforming gear. Weapons that are clearly designed to handle a specific class of enemy, such as light or medium armor, always seeming to have just a fraction less base damage to one-shot them, falling short of those all-important breakpoints. Weapons that have been found by the players to be capable of producing consistent kills are then seen and tagged by the studio for having too high a pick rate, and that vicious cycle continues onwards, with items constantly being meddled and tinkered with. Throw into the mix the argument of realism that seemingly only comes out when someone is trying to defend the changes that were made, such as, it didn't seem realistic that this weapon could do this, or this item was not falling in line with our vision for that style of gameplay and realism, which is counter to what the players are wanting, which is to just feel powerful and have a great time spreading managed democracy. But that question of realism and balancing the game so that Helldivers were always outgunned has already been seen by the player base. As players, we lived it, leading up to and including the Escalation of Freedom update, where the game had been internally hijacked by those wanting Tarkov in space, and the player counts dipped to dangerously low levels. It was clear this was not what gamers had signed up for when they purchased Helldivers, and it took a 63-day plan just to bring the game back into a form that players actually enjoyed playing. Are we here for a survival experience in space? Or is this the meme-style horde shooter that has sold over 18 million copies? You'd think at this point Arrowhead would recognize the patterns and signs and keep hammering the strong points of the game with each and every new edition. However, there's always that memory in the back of our minds and the precedence for what Arrowhead has done in the past with strong and preferred weapons and gear. Comments are popping up all over the place like this headline from PCGamer. Please don't nerf Coyote. The new Helldivers 2 Warbond has a fire-breathing rifle so good that players are begging Arrowhead to leave it alone. For many long-term vets of this game, this is the first time an assault rifle has come to the table with something unique. Not only can the weapon be upgraded through customization, but it comes standard with medium armor pen, a decent starting mag size, and incendiary rounds. Which is why some within the community are already placing their bets on how long it will be before Arrowhead decides to use pick rates, spreadsheets, and the guise of realism to then go in and fiddle with this weapon. Even the tough to bring down Hive Lords have players concerned that that difficulty, as seen on the studio side, will lead to this new Terminated boss having some sort of nerfs applied to it, making it easier to tackle. The Helldivers Reddit is showing much the same as the PCGamer article, with players calling for Arrowhead to resist their urges to meddle and just leave the damn things alone. But we've been around long enough, and we've seen enough Helldivers to know that leave it alone is not in Arrowhead's DNA. Instead, what many are suggesting is to use this not as an opportunity to nerf down the current player favorites, but to use it as an opportunity for the studio to use them as baselines for performance, and then to tune the lower performing weapons up to the level of those preferred items. The current major order has yielded more Helldiver deaths than ever before, more than the defense of Super Earth, more than the Illuminate defense on 𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗀, and far, far more than 𝗲𝗏𝗆𝗃. And there's a reason for that. The content is there. The challenge is intoxicating, and for the most part, the Dust Devils gear gives us a fighting chance versus overwhelming odds. Fellas, I've been down there on Super Helldive difficulty, and between the amount of Alpha Commanders, Burrowers, Hive Lords, and Bile Dragons all being thrown in your direction, it's a wild ride from the moment you touch down to the moment you lift off. And for Arrowhead, they are seeing consistently high player counts and consumer purchases because the content is there. Players are happy. As a studio, they need to take this time to look objectively at those pick rates and not to take the strongest down a few notches, but to balance the others that are neglected up to acceptable levels. Also, revamp and expand the weapon customization options to include all weapons while offering up more than just scope options for many items in our inventory. Arrowhead, we've come to the fork in the road. Are you going to continue to give the players what they want and are craving for, with more content, viable options in the Superstore, and consistent updates? Or are you going to push towards that vision of Tarkov in space? Your first three offerings are on the judgment table. Leave the Coyote alone. Give the solo silo 50 demo force to match the size and cooldowns of that glass cannon stratagem, and push the spear gun up to the levels of the railgun. From there, you can then start to build a new standard for player power fantasies, or at least that's my take on it. As always, I look forward to reading your feedback, so please drop a comment. Before fingers are pointed and names thrown around, understand that who you think is in charge of that department is in fact not, and that's all I'll say on that matter. Remember to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss one of my future upload alerts. Thanks so much to all of our channel members, and until the next one, this is 𝗲𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃 signing off.